Tech Reimagined. Redefining the relationship between people and technology. Brought to you by Endava. This is Tech Reimagined.
Hello everyone, I'm Bradley Howard and welcome to the latest episode of Tech Reimagined. Today marks a special day in the history of technology. It's Programmers Day. To celebrate, we've dedicated today's episode to Programmers Day and invited a dear guest of ours, Guy Kawasaki, to talk about all things technology. Hi Guy, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So Guy, back in the days when you worked at Apple, you were the chief evangelist and you were essentially marketing to programmers to create more applications for the Apple platform. How did that go? How did you find the programmers? How did you interact with them? Because I don't think you were a programmer before Apple, were you?
No. So I'm living proof that you can fool most of the people most of the time. I have a degree in psychology, which is the easiest major I could find. And then I went to law school for 2 weeks and quit. Then I went into the jewelry business, and then I went to a software company for a very brief time, like less than 6 months. And then I went to Apple to become Apple's second software evangelist, convincing people to write Mac software. So in a nutshell, that's my checkered past. So I've never taken a computer programming class. And yet I had to deal with programmers because it was my job to convince them to write Macintosh software. And back then, to tell you how crude it was, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you, you had to buy a Lisa computer. And a Lisa was, I don't know, $7,000 or $10,000. So you program on the Lisa, and then you compiled for a Macintosh. And so you had this cross compilation system. So you weren't even programming on a Macintosh for the Macintosh. You were programming on a Lisa for the Macintosh. And we had this documentation called Inside Macintosh, and it was printed on paper of the quality of a telephone book. So, not exactly the thickest, best paper. And it was thousands of pages. And so I would meet with developers, and there were kind of three pitches when you met with a company. So pitch number one was sort of the engineering and tech, which is we have so many calls to the ROM. We do so many things that you can finally write the software you've always dreamed about. So that was the weenie pitch, right? There was also the pitch like, computers are so hard to use. By having a graphical user interface, we can introduce a computer that more people can use. So we're going to broaden the market for personal computers. So that was the marketing pitch if you met with the marketing people of the company. And then if the finance people and, the adult supervision was in the room, then we would talk about, right now you're writing IBM PC software and IBM is publishing their own software. They have their own software publishing division. So imagine if they created a title and bundled it with their PC, you'd be out of business. So, you can't be on only one horse. You need to be on at least two horses so that if one horse throws you off, you can go to the second horse. So we gave these three pitches. And inevitably, companies self-selected. I mean, you could tell that, yeah, I can finally write the software I always wanted to write. Or, we're gonna increase the market for computers. Or, I don't want to be totally dependent on IBM. And one of the lessons I learned of evangelism is that if someone is open to being evangelized by you, they will tell you how to sell to them. And all you have to do is be smart enough to be quiet and listen and regurgitate back to them what you heard them say, and then they're going to think you're so smart and so perceptive because you basically are saying the same thing to them they said to you.
So who was it easier pitching to? The developers, the marketing team, or the finance team?
It's usually the developers because the developers saw Macintosh as such the holy grail of, oh my God, look at this display, look at the WYSIWYG, look at the ROM calls. There's, 400 calls to the ROM, and, we don't have to be screwing around with drawing rectangles and, all this kind of stuff. And so for them, it was, hallelujah. I mean, it was, it was Christmas every day. It was Programmer's Day every day when Guy showed up with his Macintosh prototype.
It was Programmers Day every day. Oh, I love that. So, how's the role of programmers changed now that when you were originally pitching um, the latest Apple products, they were getting pretty low level, like you say. I mean, you mentioned ROM, not us. Now that's been extrapolated quite a bit, and they're working with all different types of automation software. What do you think the role of the programmers changed?
I have hardly a random, no representative view of the world here living in Silicon Valley. But I think that programmers are the key DNA that determine everything else. And I'm a marketing guy. I'm telling you, programmers are more important than marketers. You can quote me. It's in the Macintosh division, which is where I first encountered this. I mean, that was a engineering driven division. I think, frankly, Apple to this day is an engineering driven company. And so Steve Jobs considered programmers artists. This concept of, you need to write 10,000 lines of code per day, or, whatever, this kind of quantitative management of programming, that just was not present in the division. It was all about, we thought we were changing the world, denting the universe, whatever metaphor you want to use. And these programmers were artists. And the art of the graphical user interface and how they could do things with assembly language in much tighter code that executed faster. It was it was programmer as hero.
So how would you inspire developers in other companies today to feel like they are able to change their company, change the world? What would you say to them?
You think I know the answer to this question? Like, what made you think weird? This was not in the pre-call briefing. I don't know the answer to that question. I think many companies, especially when you get larger and larger, how does an individual programmer express his or her art? If you're, imagine if you're writing printer drivers for a Windows clone. I don't know how you, oh my God, Mom, today I wrote like 10,000 lines of code to help printing in, whatever, when you want to change from Comic Sans to Helvetica. I don't know how it's a different world.
At least we got Kawasaki to say Comic Sans. That's the main thing. So have you met any particular standout programmers along the way that you still remember, that you thought, they are absolutely outstanding?
It's been a long time, but there are people like Andy Hertzfeld and Steve Capps, Bruce Horn, who worked on the Macintosh Finder. That's the system software that manages the desktop, and Andy worked on the ROMs. And Bill Atkinson wrote Mac Paint, and he wrote Quick Draw, which is the graphic routines in the Macintosh ROMs. So, I think those people were truly artists, truly geniuses in what they did. It was their, sort of language. It was their platform. And I have to tell you, since then, I have just not been in touch with programmers that much. And, the good news may be that with these modern languages, programming has become much more of a accessible skill. So it's empowered more people to become programmers. But, in my day, it was ones and zeros with assembly language. I can't, that's how it was, rubbing two sticks together.
I remember typing in assembly language from magazines in those days that used to have a whole load of programs listed in them. So you would literally type it in word for word, and it was like learning something parrot fashion. You had no idea what it was, and then you got these really strange things happening.
Oh my God!
Yes, I do. Yeah. Yes.
Bradley. But you know what the funny thing is, that 20 years from now, people are going to say, people use Java and they use Python and they use C++. Like, what were they thinking?
Yeah. where missing out a semicolon would.
I know, like they're rubbing two sticks together. How did they ever create Facebook?
Oh, maybe we'll ask Mark Zuckerberg to come on next time and he can tell us. So what advice do you have for maybe graduates that are thinking about going into programming as a career?
I maintain this romantic view of programming that it is an art. And, you know, when it becomes just an assembly line, here's a metaphor I understand much better. Okay. So let's make maybe the false equivalency that programming is like writing. And so writing is something I truly understand. And I truly do believe that writing is an art. So there are people who are very good writers, fiction or nonfiction, and there are people who are not. And there are people who write buggy code, and then there are writers who use incomplete sentences and don't use the Oxford comma and don't put a comma after a conjunction between two independent clauses. They use the passive voice too much, and they take 5 sentences to what a good writer would say in 1. Just like there are programmers who would take 1,000 lines of code where a great programmer would do it in 100 lines of code or maybe 10 lines of code. So I think that to say that all programmers are geniuses and technical wizards and all that stuff is like saying every writer is a great writer. It's simply not true. It's simply not true. There are degrees of expertise that I think is the degrees of expertise are very obvious. Now, I can't tell you I can judge that, but I could with writing. But I think you should think of programming as an art. And there are some artists and there are some just charlatans.
I completely agree with your point about programming as an art. It's an absolute creative skill. And it's probably one of the most creative parts of science. I completely agree.
Well, I don't think you would ever say to a writer, you have to write 50 pages today. Now, there is a scenario where you have something like that. So if you are a writer and let's say you're a novelist, you may set yourself a goal of writing, well, novelists and true writers would set themselves a goal of writing 2 pages a day. That would be a very good day. So maybe the number was too high. So, I believe a writer can say, okay, every day I'm going to write 2 pages. I bet a good programmer could have that same kind of attitude. But I don't think it's a thing where management can say, all right, so our most productive programmer, we're going to measure productivity by lines of code. That seems to me crazy. That not all lines of code are created equal.
And if anyone is actually wondering what Guy's talking about with lines of code, have a look on, I think it's Wikipedia, and look at KLOC, KLOC, and you'll see that developers really were assessed on how many KLOCs they could push out. Yeah, It's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention the company. Everyone can read that for themselves.
Does it have 3 letters?
On Wikipedia. Yeah. And it's related to HAL from 2001, but I'm not going there. Okay, well, look, like always, Guy, it's been a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much for joining us on this special occasion. To all of our listeners, I hope you had a great time with us today. Please make sure you subscribe and join us again next week for another episode of Tech Reimagined. Thank you.
Tech Reimagined. Redefining the relationship between people and technology. Brought to you by Endava. This is Tech Reimagined.